Hello and welcome to the Magnolia High School PSAT 10-Day Challenge. We turn the page on a new week this week as we enter into our final week before prepping for this PSAT test. So today is day 6 and we'll be doing something a little bit different today with the classes. As you will notice in your core classes, they will begin working on some testing strategies specific to those disciplines. So in other words, covering the reading passages for science, covering reading passages for social studies, and maybe some tips and strategies for working just with those. In your English classes, we'll be talking about U.S. and world literature and how to approach those passages. Let's start today, though, by talking about 5 specific strategies that you can use with any kind of reading passage that you get. The first thing you can do is understand that when you take the PSAT test, your goal is to answer as many questions correctly as you can. And sometimes that means using a different approach or strategy when you actually take the physical test. For example, on the reading comprehension test, you're most likely to be successful on answering questions when you read passages that you're familiar with. This has been proven out through lots and lots of research. So the first strategy is to triage the test. So as you carefully glance through the reading passages, choose the ones that you find easiest to answer. If you're a science person and you really like working with the science question, or you recognize a passage that deals with the subject matter that you're familiar with, that's the passage you should start with. The idea is you build confidence the more questions you're able to attack and answer correctly from the beginning. What you have to remember is that the machine that scores your test has absolutely no idea what order you bubble those questions in on. Therefore, starting with passages that are familiar to you and seem easier to you because they're familiar to you is a good strategy to get a positive start for the test. The second thing you can do that's helpful is to read the blurb that you see that appears before each passage. That will give you a clue and some kind of context as to what the passage is about, whether or not it's one you should begin with or maybe push for later down the test. But it also might give you a clue as to the purpose. You might even recognize who the author might be or what the publication that it comes from might be. And all of this can be helpful in answering questions. So one thing you'll notice is that on this test, there's a way they test how you're able to support source information, and that's through tandem questions. So you'll have in your passages a set of questions that go together. So by answering the first question, you then get a question that follows it that asks you where would you find proof to support your answer to that question. So this can actually be a blessing because if you think about it, they're giving you in those answer choices twice a chance to check your previous answer to make sure it's correct. So this is a way of testing to see can you have and identify specific text evidence that answers a specific question. So it's not necessarily a bad question to have. These should be among some of the easier questions. And again, they can help you check your work. Maybe a good strategy as you start to begin reading to mark these questions as you see them because you know that they're going to come together, and that might cause you to read a little more closely as you get to that passage. Now, the final 2 strategies as you approach any reading comprehension passage is to predict an answer. Try not to look at the answer choices, but how would you have answered that question straight up? And then as you reveal the answer choices to yourself, you may be surprised to find that you're spot on and the answer choice that you wanted is exactly there. So you might want to try this strategy as you kind of work through it. It's easy to lose your place on this test, so I don't recommend reading a passage, answering a few questions, and then dropping it and going to the next passage and then telling yourself you'll come back and answer those questions. Once you commit to reading a passage and you begin answering, you should answer all of those questions as completely as you can before moving on to a second passage. You don't want any kind of interference happening between the information in both 2 different passages that might kind of cause you to be even more confused, get panicked, and lose your place, and so forth and so on. So keep the passages straight in your head, one passage, one set of test questions at a time. Okay, so let's move on to some more basic reading comprehension strategies. If you want to take a snapshot with your phone or your QR reader, this will take you to the Kaplan Test Prep site, and I'll be going over that material that you can find there. But if you want to do this on your own pace as well as access some other resources, it's a good idea to go to this website. So there are three basic steps that Kaplan recommends, and this is a good strategy when you take the PSAT, the SAT, or even the ACT. And that is step one is to make sure that you're reading actively rather than passively. Remember, you are only getting points for answering questions correctly. So the questions are based on being an active reader. And part of being an active reader means marking the test and being willing to try to stay engaged in that text rather than letting your mind wander other places. So step two would be examining the sentence stem question or question stem and making sure that you know exactly what the question is asking you. Third step we've mentioned before is to predict the answer that you think it will be and then look among your choices to see if that is in fact one of your choices that you have. And then in a little bit I'll go through each of these three steps along with the concept called passage mapping. Again, if you want access to this information, you can simply click into the QR code and you'll get this information as well as some helpful exercises and lessons that you can work with. So let's examine step one, reading actively, a little more closely. To read actively means that you begin to take notes on the passage, you begin to ask questions in your head, and you kind of have a feel for what kinds of questions tests like the PSAT, the SAT, and the ACT ask. So prior to answering the questions, I think active reading is a very good strategy for you to have. Think about it as these passages are fairly short and you are taking notes to help you guide to the answer. Now, some things that some people like to do, I don't know if that's a good strategy for you individually, would be to read, the questions tend to progress in order and progress in chunks. So your first three questions may deal with the first third of the passage, say, and then the next may deal with the middle part of the passage. So some people like to scan the passage quickly and then go to the questions and then look at them real quickly to kind of get an idea what they're looking for. I'm not sure this is a great strategy because it does tend to take time to do that. A better use of your preparation might be to work on concentration. How do I stick with the passage without letting my mind wander? That's probably going to be a real key to saving yourself some time. Okay? But again, active reading means asking questions, taking notes as you read the passage, and then making sure that those notes are connected to the answers or the questions that are asked. So you get a feel for that as you begin to look at the types of questions. The more practice you look at, the more types of question you'll have under your belt, so you'll know a little bit more definitively what to mark. You should ask questions dealing with the author's purpose, asking you like, why did they write this particular sentence? Why did they use this particular word? Why did they make this particular argument? Can you determine whether or not the author has a point of view, like an opinion about the topic that's being written? And also, you're likely to get a question about the tone as well as the purpose of the passage. So as you're marking, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for words that might indicate the tone. You're looking for transition statements that might indicate that he has one particular view or she has one particular view or she's presenting both sides of it. Who knows? But the first thing you should do is probably, by reading the blurb, understand what is the passage type and then what are the key words that I might be looking for as I read through this. So step two means examining the sentence question stem. This means as you look at the question, you might notice that there are specific lines that are given to you where you can find your answer. Always recommend looking a little above the line limit and a little past the line limit, because sometimes your answer might be part of that context for that entire passage that they're looking at. And then look at the other question strategies as you go. But look at those key words within it. That will help clue you in on whether this is a author's purpose question or whether this is a vocabulary question or whether this is a context and meaning or whether this is an opinion question. Okay? The questions tend to range from very general assumptions you might make about the text or inferences you might draw to very specific details that you might miss if you're not reading closely. So look at the question stem to give you tips for how that will do that. And then you might want to look too at some of the examples and what these questions look like. That can be really helpful. And then again, strategy number 3 or step 3 is predict your answer. Always take a look at what you feel like the answer might be based on your reading of it and your understanding of the question stem, and then take a look at the answer choices offered. The same is true on the math section that you work with there. Your goal is to select the best match. Again, remember, you're only given points for questions that you answer correctly. So eliminate the possibility of falling into wrong answer traps by reading the question carefully, by looking at the keywords, and making sure that you are answering the question either generally as suggested, or if it's looking for specific detail, you're answering it that way as well. Okay, so what do we mean by passage mapping? All right, so step one in this Kaplan methodology for reading comprehension says that you should actively read the passage and try to take notes as you go. Now, this note-taking is sometimes called a passage map. And it's a map because, like any map, it will guide you through the questions that are there. So I think the best thing that you can do is try to get an idea for what kinds of questions tend to be repeated on this test. The passages may change, and just like the math portion of it, the numbers may change, the variables may change, but the types of questions they ask do not change. And so sometimes if you anticipate what those are, that can be a good guide for you. So always as you read, look for the central idea of the passage. What's the main point? Sometimes you can get that from the blurb. Sometimes you can get that by looking and identifying the thesis statement. I would recommend to look for that thesis in these particular types of articles. Look at that first sentence and look at the final sentence in that first paragraph, as well as the final sentence of the passage itself. You are more likely to find the thesis statement or the claim right there. Another thing to look for would be transitions. Transitions suggest changes, and as we like to say in English class, there are no little buts in English. That word but tells you there's a shift going on, and the logic has changed, or that the author is trying to deal with this subject in a fair manner and present another side to it. Remember, the author's opinions are their opinions as well as those that authors might cite. It's very rare for you to get a question that asks what your opinion is. It is more likely you'll be asked what's the opinion of the writer, and that you can find by looking at tone, by looking at word choice, and by looking at purpose. All right. Now, it might seem like this is very time consuming to take notes, but again, if you study the types of questions that are asked, this can be vital in saving you some time from looking at a question, going back to the passage, going back to the question, back to the passage, and sometimes rereading it more than once. That's why I do not recommend trying to read all the questions first and then go into the reading passage. You should already have a good working knowledge of what types of questions are being asked before you even enter that. And just remember, the PSAT, the SAT, the ACT, most standardized tests are open book tests. That means the answer is always present. It's your job, and they provide it to you in your answer choices. Your job is to decipher the logic of the test question and where that answer is, or what that best answer might be. Now we're going to move on to the literature reading passages. One type of reading passage that you'll get, in addition to science, in addition to humanities, might be a literary passage. And this will come from either United States literature or from world literature. Now, in a literary passage, there are 3 additional steps you can follow. Number 1 is you are likely to get a question about a character or characters and evaluate the author's description of those characters. You may be asked to assess like the character's point of view on the topic, or the message that the author seems to be giving through this particular character. And then last but not least, you're likely and probably highly likely to be asked some kind of theme or claim statement about the passage. So let's go over some strategies for that. And again, I'm going to put a QR code up there. If you wish, you can find this lesson as well as some practice passages at this website on this QR code. This will take you to the Kaplan Test Prep website. Okay, so you should understand that there will be one of these types of passages on the PSAT. It would be either a passage that comes from a work of literature from America or from the world, likely a British writer, but not always. These passages will be different because there may be more than one character involved. There may be multiple opinions involved within the fiction piece as well. The tone is likely not to be directly stated, but must be inferred by you. This type of passage is not informative. It is not explanatory. It is meant for fiction, but it's fiction with a purpose built around a theme. So as you read these passages, be on the lookout that you're doing these things. This is how you might mark the passage, okay? What seems to be the goal of the characters? What is it that they want to accomplish? So if we evaluate a character, we evaluate them in terms of what's the goal they have, and have they achieved that goal at any cost, and has it been worth that cost? So what are the characters doing to achieve that goal or solve that problem? And then can you come up with your own adjectives, because you're likely to get a question like, which of the following words or phrases best describe the character so-and-so? And so by kind of anticipating that ahead of time, you can kind of help yourself a little bit. The other thing you might want to be on the lookout for as you mark the passage is how these characters seem to interact with each other. Do they have differing opinions and differing approaches to solving the problem that they face, the conflict that they face, the goal they want to achieve? Do they seem to like each other? Do they dislike each other? How do you know this? How do they make their decisions? And does that particular methodology for making the decision give us any clue about them as a character? What does all this stuff tell us about the character? So if we were looking for a key word to describe a character again, we can look at their actions, their decision making, the way they approach these problems and obstacles, and that will give us a clue about their character. And then last but not least, you're almost guaranteed to have a question about theme of the story. So what seems to be the subject that's at the center of this story, and what is the character doing towards that subject? What is the outcome? The outcome for the character will often tell you the author's opinion about the answer to the theme or the subject they're dealing with. And please remember, theme is not a single word. Love is not a theme. Theme must be matched with a verb, okay? Love conquers all is a theme. Love itself is not a theme. Look to, if you could summarize, like, what's the moral to this story? That might be a good starting point to find the theme. And just a reminder, as you go through this passage that's literary, remember, if you're dealing with multiple characters and multiple opinions, it's sometimes hard to keep things straight. That's where marking the text can be very helpful. And as you're mapping your passage, as you're taking those notes, you might want to jot names off in the margin so it's very clear to you that this is important. This is where the character is stating a belief. This is where the character is taking an action, and identify which character that is. Note-taking is a very, very valuable resource that you can develop not only on these tests, but in life as well. Okay, that's the long and short of it. Today again was day 6. We'll see you tomorrow with day 7 of the Magnolia High School PSAT 10-day challenge. Thanks for watching.